it's also subconscious control, right? Because if you feel like you are able to transcend gender, what else do you feel like you might be able to transcend? Class?
Okay. Morning, everybody. I want to thank you for showing up. Today we'll be talking with Emily Likins, a very old friend who has been involved in reproductive justice and, reproductive justice for what, close to 10 years now?
Yeah, a little over 10 years now since it's been how many years since we graduated high school?
I refuse to actually think about that number. Um, well, why don't you start with as much of your story as you're comfortable with telling about how you got into this? Because I remember some of it, but not necessarily all of how you started this particular journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm glad that this issue has caught your attention. Um, really, when I had my abortion, Matt, you were one of the few people I felt really comfortable talking with about sort of the complicated emotions that go along with sort of any sort of reproductive experience, but particularly one that is surrounded by so much stigma and silence and lack of socially acceptable places to sort of discuss these experiences. So, yeah, like I said, I had an abortion. I now am an abortion counselor. I'm not a counselor. I don't have a counseling license. I'm a peer support person. The state of Illinois will have my ass if I call myself a counselor. But I provide peer support for people during reproductive experiences. I'm a doula. That's what I call myself, a doula. So abortion, pregnancy, that's carried to term. I help people through childbirth, and I also support them postpartum when they bring their baby home. I come over and I take care of them, or I take care of their baby while they get some sleep. So it's direct care work, but it's also social emotional support, logistical planning, medical advocacy is like a huge part of my job because obviously these are medical events for most people: birth, pregnancy, abortion. So I got into this work after I had an abortion myself. And like I said, it was kind of a complicated experience for me. And I was just confused as to why so many people have abortions and so few places in our society talk about this. And kind of just ended up down the rabbit hole from there. I was studying literature in university, thinking that I would, I don't know, I guess go to grad school. I didn't really have a plan. And then I started interning at the clinic where I had my abortion. And I was providing peer support. I was a medical assistant at the clinic. And I held a lot of hands while people had their abortions. And it really impacted me. So I spent a lot of years doing this. Turns out it doesn't pay that well to work at an abortion clinic. So I ended up sort of pivoting and working for labor unions for a number of years. And now I'm back doing independent reproductive health care. So I have a website, traumainformeddoula.com.
It's
You
in the
can check out
doobly-doo
some of
down
this.
below.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, you can kind of check out more of my work and more of like what I do. If you're a parent, I have a postpartum support group. It's free. You can come, it's virtual. Yeah, so I guess I mostly ended up here because I myself had reproductive experiences and they sucked. And I want them to suck less for other people. Unfortunately, when we look at the statistics, things are just sucking more by the day. So,
Yeah, we had a couple of conversations over the last couple months, particularly when the Supreme Court leak came out, and then again when the Supreme Court decision happened, um, about the decline in reproductive care.
mhm.
However, you made the point that it's been declining for quite some time prior to that in the United States. availability and accessibility of it. Want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Okay, so I had my abortion in 2010. So we're talking about 13 years ago now. Talking about getting old. So I was the ripe old age of 21 or 20 years old when I had my abortion. And I was living in Montana, and there were really no restrictions. It was quite easy for me to find an abortion care provider that was not only safe and legal, but also really kind and compassionate. When I had my abortion, I was very certain that that was the right thing to do, but I was racked with guilt. And the people at the clinic were very loving and sort of treated me with a kindness I didn't feel as though I deserved at the time. I think that made a difference for me as an individual and in the way that I was able to sort of integrate that experience into my life. All that being said, it was still a challenging experience for me. So once I sort of realized how hard it was for other people to get their abortions, I was pissed. I mean, I was angry about everything at that in
I
my life.
remember. You were pretty angry before then too. Mostly at me.
I mean, I've been to therapy now, so I can channel the anger more effectively. But seriously, like I was pissed when I started sort of hearing some of the things that other people had been through in order to procure their abortion. Not only do you have to take time off work, find a place to have an abortion, find the money to pay for the abortion, maybe find someone to drive you to and from the abortion, right? Like there's all of these pieces to this puzzle. And then on top of it, if you live in a state where there were some restrictions, which back in 2010, the restrictions were more like required transvaginal ultrasounds, state mandated counseling that included, lies, medical untruths, waiting periods. Like you would show up and be like, I want an abortion. And they would say, okay, come back tomorrow. And if you still want it, then we can give it to you. And those were barriers, but you could still get the abortion at the end of the day. You just kind of had to put up with some bullshit in between. But we could sort of see the writing on the walls. Living in a state like Montana at the time, we were fighting off anti-abortion legislation since 1970, whatever, when Roe got passed. Because as soon as we got Roe v. Wade, we had a reaction from the religious right and a reaction from the anti-abortion movement that didn't really exist before the Supreme Court ruling. We didn't necessarily have a guaranteed right to abortion before then, but we didn't necessarily have like a galvanized anti-abortion movement either. So these people got crazy in the 90s, like Operation Rescue and a couple of other organizations that are closely affiliated with like evangelical activism became extremely active in the 90s. They would do lots of like blocking of people of getting into abortion clinics. They would like super glue the door shut, and they would throw themselves in front of cars and say, if you're going to go into this abortion clinic, you have to like run me over. So these people got crazy.
Yeah, there is a book talks a little bit about that called "What's the Matter with Kansas," by Thomas Frank.
That's a great book.
Yes, so he talks about with respect to Kansas, at least in the 90s and early aughts, of how the pro-life movement hijacked a lot of the agenda of the Republican Party. My bookshelf is terribly unorganized. It talks about how it hijacked the agenda of the Republican Party, and it got people to vote on a lot of economic issues that they would not necessarily have agreed with because of their status, because of the anti-abortion movement. There is, I think, a lot of pain and suffering that we've caused in the last 30 years that seems entirely unnecessary, just by trying to allow people to access basic health care.
Yeah, so this in 2010, this situation was we had a lot of abortion providers who were running scared because in the 90s, these fuckers showed up to people's churches and murdered them, right? Like Dr. Tiller from
Yes.
Kansas, he was murdered in church in front of his grandchildren because he provided people with abortions. I mean, they firebombed in 1993, they firebombed the clinic that I worked at. I mean, I obviously didn't work at that location in 1993.
We were kind of
We
small
worked,
then.
yeah, I was quite small, but we worked in the rebuilt clinic, which was actually is like on a list of one of the safest like physical locations in the United States. So like if there's some sort of like domestic emergency, we were on this like special list because this clinic is like fireproof. It has this like special safe house in the basement. It has an iron gate that locks that goes all the way around the outside. It has a state-of-the-art security system. Like all of this is remnants of that very violent anti-abortion movement that was in the 90s. And you know, we all get death threats, you know. So like a lot of us who work in this field are sort of immune to that sort of like constant threat of violence. The ironic threat of violence coming from like supposedly nonviolent, you know, they're trying to save lives, but
Yeah. Grappling with the hypocrisy of the pro-life movement. Like when you mentioned the waiting periods, I had this thought going back to how bitterly a lot of conservatives oppose waiting periods for purchase of firearms and how ardently they would support a waiting period for receiving an abortion. It's like, well, so do waiting periods preserve life or don't they?
right. Right. Or like, you know, imagine if you went to go purchase a firearm and you had to sit through a slideshow presentation of images of slaughtered children, you know, who had been killed by firearms. But and then they look at you and say, "Are you sure you want to purchase this gun?" You know, would that sway anyone? I'm not certain that it would. But I do know that it would make it a bigger headache to buy a gun, which I think is kind of the purpose behind a lot of the early abortion restrictions were just to make abortion inconvenient and uncomfortable, sort of punitively.
Some of that sounds like a transvaginal ultrasound sounds pretty invasive to begin with.
I mean, transvaginal ultrasounds it's very invasive. It is also the most effective way to date in early pregnancy, which, you know, whether or not that's pertinent information for an abortion care provider is hotly debated among us abortion cheerleaders. But it is the whole maternal health care system, whether you're having an abortion or giving birth, putting your baby up for adoption, planning to have 10 kids, home birth, hospital birth. The system is set up to surveil, demean, oppress, and control people who reproduce, reproductive bodies. So, like, the abortion stuff is sort of a microcosm of that because it's a hotly contested form of healthcare. But there are other hotly contested forms of like women's healthcare that I work within, like being allowed to have a vaginal birth after you've had a cesarean section. You know, a lot of hospitals ban this. They say it's not allowed. A lot of providers will not support a person who wants to give birth vaginally if they've had a C-section in the past. So, like, there are lots of ways that, and this is what helped me make the bridge from just doing abortion care work into a larger reproductive justice framework, was just realizing that this system is so pervasive. It's like anyone with a uterus, anyone who can get pregnant is at risk of being traumatized and brutalized by a system that is intended to embarrass us, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it does.
Maybe the whole system is like that. But when we're doing reproductive care, it has to do with our most private part of our whole body. So it's like a little kind of, you know, going to the OBGYN feels different than having my throat and ears looked at by my doctor. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think there is. No, there's definitely there's even a stigma necessarily for men uh, dealing with reproductive issues or, for
Yeah.
example, infection. It can be very awkward. But I don't know how much that is down to necessarily it being awkward generally. Like if you were to go, hey, buddy, I have an STI, or hey, doc, I have an STI. Both of those interactions feel pretty awkward, but the second one feels like it shouldn't be. Um,
Mhm.
when you say that hospitals ban having a vaginal birth post having a cesarean section, is that an administrative decision or is that based off of some kind of old medical science?
Both, both, and a lot
Hang on, you
of it
cut out
are.
there for a second.
Am I back?
You're
Sorry,
back.
my husband works remotely, and our internet is only so good because you know how they treat internet in this country.
Yes,
But
we're about to get fiber in about the next month, and I'm rejoicing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of an essential thing. But here we are. Yeah. So like some of it's insurance, right? Like the hospital's insurance company doesn't want them to do this. Some of it is that providers are poorly trained and have been taught old medical science that says once a cesarean, always a cesarean, which is not really true. And so it is hospital policy. Like hospitals make more money when someone has a C-section than they do when someone has a vaginal birth. And so like the WHO, the World Health Organization, says that approximately 15% of people who give birth will require a C-section to save their life. Okay, 15% of birthing people. But in the United States, the C-section rate is over 30%. So we can sort of safely assume that around half of the C-sections that are performed in the United States are maybe
Unnecessary.
unnecessary. So, I'm also on the board of an organization called the International Cesarean Awareness Network. I've had 2 cesarean sections. Whether or not they were necessary is something, it's like a whole discussion for a different day. But at the end of the day, I was given the options. Like my doctor laid out my options for me and I got to choose what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
Not everybody gets.
I was reading prior to this on some things. Apparently, the statistic is medical science is about 15 years behind given research at a given time. Uh, that's disconcerting for me. But it's not necessarily universal either, I don't think. Like some treatments, the cutting edge stays cutting edge because they get a lot of money, like cancer.
Sure.
Uh,
Do
it,
you do your own research and see what your options are, or do you just trust your doctors to tell you what to do?
so because of my complex health condition, I have to spend a lot of time looking into things. I don't necessarily know if I would call it research in the same way that you are running studies or tests, but I do look at what literature is out there and what's happening for the treatment of kidney disease at that time. And there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot that's happening, but actually for a fairly similar reason, because the most promising set of treatment available that could actually cure chronic kidney disease is stem cells.
Ah,
So it does overlap a little bit, and the same people who are screaming at you would scream at me.
yes. Yes. Wow, that's interesting. There's implications beyond just like banning abortions when they ban abortions. That's for sure.
Well, one of the things that I have come to realize as I've been uh, moving into my third decade of life is nothing is ever isolated, and everything intersects with one another. So, we were talking a little bit prior to this about kind of uh, uh, I'm losing words today. I am very tired. Gender justice, and kind of
Yeah.
this, like, in my mind, particularly like you talk about things like feminism and gender justice movement. In my mind, there's a whole lot of overlap between the goals of feminism and medical independence for people. Like, and then you factor in the thing of the cost. Medical bills are medical bills and insurance companies in America are simply absurd.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you, of all people, understand the complex situation that people find themselves in when they have to navigate. I mean, in the doula world, we call it the medical industrial complex or the medical industrial system, right? Just like we talk about like a military industrial system or yes, this is a public service, or like this is something that our society requires, is like healthcare systems, right? Like somebody has to do this. Someone has to catch babies. Someone has to, be a nurse and take care of people in hospitals and bandage wounds, and right, like we have a need for this as a
Right.
society. And so someone has decided to take advantage of this and make a ton of money off of it because it's a necessity, in the same way that they've taken control of our food. They've taken control. They're trying to take control of all of our water. They've taken control, so it's like, you can look at it from a Marxist or like an anti-capitalist lens super easily and say like, okay, the healthcare system is broken, maternal care is broken. They're trying to control us. They want women at home in the kitchen taking care of children because they're sick of competing with us economically in the workplace. Ever since World War II, we have seen, and this goes into the gender justice thing. Okay, so like when we talk about the history of feminism or whatever in the United States, we can look at it sort of in different waves, is kind of how people describe it. So first wave feminism were the suffragettes. These are the people who were advocating for the right to vote. Women wanted the right to vote. We wanted full citizenship, and these biddies were also largely involved with the temperance movement. So this is where the idea that feminists are no fun kind of comes from, because the suffragettes were also sort of behind prohibition. So so once this right to vote, gets won, women start participating in new ways in the, in the economy or in the kind of public sphere. And then we have World War II, where women are sort of forced en masse back into the workplace. So when we're talking about second wave feminism, we're sort of talking about the daughters of these Rosie the Riveters, right? People like Gloria Steinem, that we think of, the hippie women who were burning their bras and all of this, right? They watched their mothers go to work and build war machines and then get told to come home and like be quiet and just make a roast, right? And they were like, fuck that. We have the right to participate fully in this economy and in this public sphere. And these are the second wave feminists who, the ERA feminists, the feminists who started Ms. Magazine, the feminists who, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The peace and love, free love, women can wear pants.
The people made Phyllis Schlafly very, very mad. Yes.
These are the four. These are, sort of what we call like of the modern feminist movement, and these are the people who won us Roe v. Wade. They literally held a bake sale, who earned the money they needed to file against the Attorney General of Texas, and it went to the Supreme Court, and it became Roe v. Wade. And Roe never got her abortion. Their not defendant, plaintiff, the plaintiff of Roe v. Wade, Roe, never got her abortion. She had that child, gave birth to that child, and gave it up for abortion, or gave it up for adoption, because the case had not been settled by the time she gave birth. So, all of that is to say that all of this political shit is happening amidst this constant backdrop of people having babies. 300,000 babies are born every day globally. So we're talking about like huge waves of people giving birth in the midst of all of this sort of socio-political conversation or bullshit that's happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's this.
I didn't necessarily get how frequent births are. The hospital I go to here for my care, they play a little jingle, and it's really creepy. It's like that do thing, like horror movie music every time a baby is born. And they play it throughout the entire hospital, and they play it throughout all the adjoining medical office buildings at the same time.
Oh my God.
And I just sit there at every time, because I've spent a fair amount of time at this hospital. Every staff member I've talked to about it when it happens, they all agree that it is the most obnoxious thing hospital administration has ever done. But it happens all the time, day and night, all the time. Every time I go to that hospital, someone is, and that has a lot to do with the fact that our hospital system is kind of overwhelmed here, and has been thoroughly overwhelmed for the last 2 years.
Yeah, there's not just a shortage of abortion providers, there's a shortage of midwives, a shortage of OBGYNs. People drive immense distances in order to seek prenatal care, in order to seek a hospital that can handle their birth. Like this is one of the problems that we're trying to solve. Even back in 2010, when I had my abortion, 85% of US counties lacked an abortion provider. Here where Matt and I went to high school and grew up, like in order to get an abortion, it seems like it would be really easy, but I mean, honestly, it's like an hour and a half in any direction before you're at a place where you can really get an abortion. You have to drive into the city, you have to drive down to Peoria. Just last year, well, I guess it was 2 years ago now, a Planned Parenthood that does full service abortion opened in Homewood Flossmoor. But until then, it was like if you were outside of a main city center, even 40 or 50 miles outside of a main city center, you're shit out of luck. You better find a ride.
40.
Because it was.
Homewood Flossmoor is about 40 minutes from where we grew up. That's still a long drive.
It's still a long drive, and there's no public transportation out here. So if you are someone who doesn't have a car, someone who doesn't have a driver's license, someone who is maybe trapped at home with small children, or stuck at home while your partner is like working all the time, or maybe you work during the hours that the abortion clinic is open. And in order for you to go to the abortion clinic and have your abortion, you have to take time off work. And that would be financially devastating for your family. Because as we all know, most people live paycheck to paycheck these days. So
yes.
there's barriers upon barriers, even if you don't live in a state like whatever, where it's actually literally illegal and they're trying to like punish people with the death penalty for seeking them.
Yeah,
but
the fact that that was proposed unironically in multiple state legislators just blew my mind.
Like I said, Matt, they've been sending us death threats since the 90s. They want us dead. They will do they think that a woman is better off dead than not reproducing. These are the same guys who believe in like punitive rape. They're running our country.
I didn't vote for them.
Yeah, I mean.
So, where are
but what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do is now the question. Like it's in the first wave of feminism, they stood up and they got the right to vote, right? So now this right to vote doesn't mean shit, because I didn't vote for these fucking people, yet they are taking away my right to abortion. So what are my options, right? We have to like look to a new kind of activism in the feminist movement, one that has like traditionally been very feminine. Like, hey, let's get together and like let's let's talk about our feelings, and let's talk about how we can get a raise at work, and let's try to do this the right way and be polite and be kind.
Careful.
It just doesn't work.
If you want to talk about alternatives, be indirect so YouTube doesn't slam us. I tend to refer to things as kinetic solutions.
I'm just saying that there is another version of our activism, and that's what we're coming into right now. So now we're coming into sort of like a new phase of gender justice, where it's no longer about asking politely if we can behave like capitalist men. Now we are saying, like, down with the paradigm that says there are only two ways to exist, haves and have-nots, rich or poor, like black or white, man or woman, right? We're trying to see more sort of like spectrum, nuance, and individuality. And that's an American value, individuality. Everybody wants to be very individual here. And that's kind of the point of the gender justice movement, is that, like, between you and me, Matt, there are more differences as individuals than as like man and woman, right? Like, you come from a different family, you have your own set of experiences, you have your own set of barriers and struggles and privileges, and you have your own set of traumas, and you have your own set of resilience, right? That's you as an individual. That's not like anything to say about you as a man.
It's universal.
Right.
Like we talked a little bit about this prior, and this kind of how we define feminine and masculine traits and assign them, or roles, I think is a better way to put it. How we assign roles to men and women do not necessarily match up with how people identify. So like you see a case of men being a breadwinner or women being the homemaker, and men make homes and women win bread. So those things don't necessarily lap, but they don't make you less of that thing.
Yeah.
And like, I don't necessarily see any reticence in someone like my part for gender evolution is a personal one and not based on anything rational. Like, you're so accustomed to the concept that abandoning the concept seems inconceivable. But there's no particular reason for the existence of the concept.
Other than control, right? Like, it's a system of control. Okay, so like think about the characteristics of an abusive husband or like an abusive partner, right? One of the things that they will say is like, oh, they always controlled what I wore. They always wanted to have something to say about how I wore, or they liked my hair long, or they told me I couldn't cut my hair short, or they said I wore too much makeup, or I needed to dress a certain way, right? Like, the idea that we can someone else, someone external, whether it's a partner, a parent, a teacher, or a school, right? This whole idea about it, like a school uniform or being like subjected to a school dress code, right? These are all role that they exist in order to maintain order. Like, if you were to sort of ask a statist or ask someone who is invested in the idea of law and order, they would say, well, yes, we need a dress code so that people aren't, dressing in a way that's distracting to others, because it lowers their ability to concentrate at school or whatever, right? This is what the school administrators claim, that they have to control certain people's behavior because it will be too upsetting to those around them. Whether or not that's fair, I don't know. Like, that's a whole course in like political ethics and political theory that we could dive into. But that's at kind of the core of the anti-abortion movement, is that we need to control people's reproduction. So like, there's lots of theories out here about why everyone cares so much about abortion. Why do people fucking care? Is it because they hate women and they want women to like have a subservient role in society? Kinda. Is it because they hate sex and they don't want people having sex because an orgasm just like
That clearly
unleashes
isn't the
communication
case.
in the person's body. Yes, it's partially that. Is it that they want to control their own daughters and their own sons? They don't want their own children to be too free because then they might embarrass them or make a choice that disregards political affiliation or disregards a religious doctrine. Like, yes, that's part of it. It's also subconscious control, right? Because if you feel like you are able to transcend gender, what else do you feel like you might be able to transcend? Class? God forbid, right? So like there's all these layers, but at the end of the day, it's a reproductive it's a reproductive control thing. It stems from population control. Okay, like we have a falling birth rate.
Chat is agreeing with you right now. So
2 generations ago, the average American family had 2.5, it was like 2.7 children 2 generations ago. So about 3 kids per family. Now the birth rate is 1.4. So it has pretty much cut in half. People are older on average when they have their first child, and they're less likely to have bigger families now. So this poses a problem for people who expect exponential capitalist growth in our society. Because if we are not replacing ourselves as consumers and workers, the next generation will not have such a big pool of workers to exploit and consumers to sell to. So people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and whatever are starting to get nervous because they're going to have a smaller pool of workers, which means the workers will have more leverage and more power. They will have a smaller swath of customers to sell things to, and their exponential growth will come to a very unflattering halt if we do not have enough babies. And so this is happening globally. This isn't just a US problem. We see this in other countries, like Scandinavian countries have experienced a falling birth rate. Russia has experienced a falling birth rate. Let's not forget, high birth rates also means lots of soldiers. It means lots of people who can go to war. So when we have falling birth rates in countries, political entities start panicking and they think, okay, we have one of 2 options. Either we can incentivize parenthood. So this is what Scandinavian countries have done, socialized medicine, subsidized childcare, guaranteed parental leave. Russia gives you $12,000 in your bank account just for having a baby. They've incentivized parenthood. Here in the United States, they are just going to do like what they do in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other very sort of high control government countries. And they are restricting reproductive rights, cutting off people's access to contraception, and pushing an overall narrative of, like abortion is bad and trying to push this politically, right? So those are the 2 ways. You can force people to have babies or you can incentivize people to have babies. And right now the United States refuses to do anything about the massive issues that I face as a parent. Like I fucking wanted kids and I'm just like, oh my God.
yeah,
It's impossible.
there's also a racial quality to it. They want certain people having kids, certain populations they do not want having kids. Like, and it's especially among right wingers. The entire concept of whiteness bothers me, but it's the word we have for it. But they want white babies. They do not necessarily want children of color.
It's true. I mean, they want a certain amount of children of color or black babies, indigenous babies, because they need someone to fight on the front lines. Like I just said, like we need soldiers, we need people to work at Starbucks, like. But at the same time, like they are very worried about, what do they call it, the replacement theory or whatever.
Yes.
Like they're worried that white women, and really when you look at abortion rates, white women do have more abortions than black women. That is true. That is true. White women love abortion. We've had pretty good access to abortion. We have lots of little fan groups where we chit chat about abortion and stuff. And like a lot of the a lot of the reproductive justice advocates that I work with distance themselves from a lot of the white women activists who are really caught up in abortion, because a lot of the Black women activists and Indigenous activists that I talk to are really, really worried about things like maternal mortality rates, the fact that infants, like an infant in the hospital, if they are a Black infant and they're cared for by a white doctor, they're twice as likely to die versus if a Black infant is cared for by a Black doctor in the hospital.
And
So this is like red flags all over the place, right? We see Black mothers dying at a rate of like 12 times the rate of white women in the hospital when they show up to give birth, which live birth is the #1 reason for hospitalization in the United States. So like just stepping foot in a hospital is kind of a death sentence for a lot of Black women. So a lot of the, the activists that I work with who are only solely focused on abortion stuff are mostly white people. And then like the Black activists that I know are like, okay, we need to totally overthrow this whole system. And, Planned Parenthood is not, like, we cannot forget that Planned Parenthood is also a corporation that sort of leads to these disparities within communities. Anything that reflects this capitalist model seems to result in bad outcomes for people when they need health care.
yes, and to be clear, we're talking about a systemic problem and not that there's a conspiracy of doctors. I just want to say this out loud. Not that there's a conspiracy of doctors working to control the population. Just so we're clear. The other
I mean, here's the thing. Tons of racist doctors. There's tons of fucking racist doctors.
Absolutely.
They not even realize they're racist.
But that's a systemic problem.
It is. It is systemic.
Like, it's very easy to walk into being racist and or benefiting from a racist system and not know about it.
Totally. And that's part of this is like, it's a racist system, right? So like, even if every doctor within this system was pure of heart and perfect and never made a mistake and never let a bias influence them, there would still be this disparity because it is the system in and of itself that is creating the disparities. However, there are also straight up sexual abusers who become OBGYNs so they can sexually abuse people. This is true and happens, just so you know.
Yes.
People who are literally raped by their doctor while they're in labor. People who are raped by their doctor while they are undergoing a cesarean section. So there are evil people everywhere, right? Like, okay, when we think about the cops, there are like the straight up evil cops. There are the cops who feel like they're doing a good job but aren't. There's the cops who are just lazy and participating in a system without engaging with it. There are cops who look the other way, right? Like there's all these levels, but it's all part of the same system and they are all culpable.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of great OBGYNs who fucking go way out of their way to save people's lives and listen to people when they need it. And I know, Palestinian women OBGYNs and Black women OBGYNs and people who have overcome immense barriers societally, large barriers in society in order to access this sort of like upper echelon in order to like redo the system and make it better. So like that gives me hope. But like midwives are illegal in a lot of states still. Just now in Illinois, we just legalized midwifery fully in Illinois this year. So
yeah,
it's not just the hospitals, it's the laws.
Right. And those all play into one another, which is, I think, part of the point. The tricky thing is, like, I have, in very rare cases, had a hard time getting a doctor to take me seriously. But at the same time, I've also had to be a fairly loud and sometimes semi-obnoxious patient to get my way. Although the emergency room people love me. They think I'm fantastic.
They're like, this guy knows what he wants. He knows what he needs. He tells us and we do it.
And I'm not mean about it. But it's not necessarily a universal experience. Like women, people of color have much harder times getting doctors to take their issues seriously.
Yeah, and like a lot of women are socialized to be like good girls or whatever and like kind of be seen and not heard. And so that act of doing what you just described, like kind of being obnoxious or kind of like being a little irritating is like totally not on the table for them and have been socialized their lives. So that's like why people hire me, is so that I can come in and be that obnoxious person for them. And Matt, I'm
You're
sure you know that
perfect
I'm
for
pretty
that.
good at that.
You are absolutely perfect for that.
I finally found a job where I can like use all these weird skills I have. But like it is very challenging for people to sort of be able to discern the difference between a doctor's expertise and like being bullied by a healthcare professional into something that feels off or not right. And the thing that's really different about like you have a medically complex life, right? Like
That's one way to put it.
yeah, like this is just part of your experience. But like pregnancy is not really a sickness. Childbirth is not a medical emergency. 85% of births happen without a single need for intervention or without a single complication. So this is the way I describe the maternal health care system a lot of the time. Like I have glasses, right? Thank God I have these glasses. Oh boy. They help me drive, they help me like do stuff, but not everybody needs glasses. And it would be absolutely ridiculous of us to give everybody glasses just because I need them, right?
Right.
Some people need medical intervention when they give birth. And it's great that we have the medical intervention available when people need it. But the way the system works is that we're giving everybody glasses when they walk in the hospital to give birth. We hook them up to machines, we give them unnecessary medication, we rush the process, and then we say, uh-oh, why isn't this working right? And it's like, well, because there wasn't really anything wrong. You're trying to fix something that isn't broken. You've given someone glasses who sees just fine. So now we have a problem because this prescription is not right for everybody. If someone else puts my glasses on, they're going to get a fucking headache, right? You give somebody Pitocin who doesn't need Pitocin, and they may end up with a C-section they don't need because you've now interrupted what is a very natural, normal process like eyesight unnecessarily, right? So I don't think, like you said, I don't think the doctors are like, okay, let's fuck up this woman's birth and make sure she ends up with a C-section. Like, I don't think it really happens that way. I think it's more just like the medical system has walked people into this idea about birth being dangerous or about birth being a medical event that requires a whole team of medical professionals, when really it's actually just a very small percent of births that need all of that extra. So why is it that only 1% of people give birth outside of the hospital?
Well, that's very much been conditioned not to at this point.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to run back to the question we have thus far. How expensive is the process, either one, the process of pregnancy or seeking abortion care in the United States?
That's a really good question. Okay, so depending on what kind of insurance you have, you may or may not have access to things like childbirth education, a lactation consultant, a breast pump. These are things that are expensive and not necessary when you are pregnant or giving birth, but they are things that most people invest in. So childbirth education runs you about $500. A breast pump will run you about $1,200. And a lactation consultant can run you anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. If you wanted to hire a doula, someone like me, I charge about $2,000 for my services, but some people go as low as like $1,200, $900, something in there. And that's just the extras, right? That's not including like whatever you would spend in clothes because your body's changing. Most people invest in things like extra pillows or like hemorrhoid creams. The body does lots of weird things. People end up spending a lot more on things like groceries because they're usually eating a little bit better when they're pregnant. And then there's the prenatal care. So for the first, pregnancy is generally broken into 3 trimesters. So during the first trimester, you would see your doctor once or twice, and this includes a transvaginal ultrasound. So ultrasounds can run anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s, depending on your insurance. Some people, this stuff is covered under their insurance, right? Ideally, all of this is covered, but most people have a copay or a deductible that they have to reach. So, okay, there's the prenatal care in the first trimester is infrequent. In the second trimester, you go once every other month to see your doctor. And then in the third trimester, you go every 2 weeks and then every week. So it's something like 20 or so appointments during your pregnancy. And, you know, you have to pay for gas and parking, or you have to pay for a bus or a cab or whatever to get to and from your physician. Some people, you know, if you have children, you may have to pay for childcare or a babysitter while you go to your appointments. Then childbirth itself can vary. So if you're having, say, a home birth, you'll probably end up paying about $4,000 for a midwife. Most insurance companies don't cover home birth, so this is usually out of pocket. And then you usually have probably about $500 worth of sort of supplies that you have to purchase for a home birth. And then if you give birth vaginally in a hospital without any medication or any complications, it would run you about $1,500. If you were to, you know, by the time you add up a variety of interventions, like an epidural can run people anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000, depending on where you're giving birth and what your insurance is. Pitocin, you know, they charge people for everything in the hospital. So like these bills can get very large, right? Like I had a cesarean section with my first baby, and I had Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, so I was able to see the bill. And it was $47,000 for the birth and the 4-day hospital stay. So that didn't include any of the blood work or labs that my prenatal care required, and that didn't include any ultrasounds or any sort of anything like that. And then you get one checkup postpartum at 6 weeks. So if you have to pay individually because you don't have insurance for each one of those appointments, I'm not sure what that would fully add up to. You know, Medicaid covers prenatal care. So that was how I had my second baby, was all on Medicaid. And then an abortion. Okay, so a medication abortion from a place like Planned Parenthood would probably be about $900. A medication abortion from an independent abortion clinic or a regular OBGYN would probably run about $500. A medication abortion with pills that you get in the mail that you order online runs about $100. And a surgical abortion that is in the first trimester is about $700 or $800. About $1,200 if you go to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood's kind of twice as much as your local clinic. And then if you have a second trimester abortion, like past 12 weeks, you're usually looking at more like around $2,000 for a procedure. And if you're in the third trimester, so these are people who have a fetal anomaly, like their baby is very, very sick and will not survive outside of the womb, these run about 25 grand. So it really depends on a variety of factors. I know that was a lot of numbers, but it costs an extraordinary amount to give birth in the United States. Abortion is also very expensive. I have friends who work internationally in abortion rights, and they are able to get abortion pills to the end user for about $6 American dollars. So when you hear that Planned Parenthood is charging like $900 for a medication abortion, it's like, yeah, they have overhead in there, but like we could also be doing better. But this is American care, right? Like this is,
Yeah.
I just have my gallbladder removed and could give you a civil litany of bullshit charges, right?
Yes, the markup on stuff in American healthcare is also obscene.
This is partially the FDA has only approved certain medications. there's more abortion meds available. Like in India, you can get abortion meds over the counter. They call it Plan C.
Because there's a plan A and a plan B. No, I think, yeah, and there's some astonishment from people outside the country. Yes, American healthcare is absurdly expensive. For example, the dialysis treatments that I have to do to stay alive kind of cost upwards of $30,000-$40,000 a month.
Oh my Lord.
And also the thing you mentioned, Medicaid. Getting assistance in the United States is incredibly difficult. There
It is
is
incredible.
there are absurd to begin with. Qualifying can be very hard because the income caps that they prescribe, uh, unless you have a family to begin with, are very, very not corresponding to real life. Like it's something like between $10,000 and $15,000 for a one household person to qualify. You cannot live anywhere in this country, especially right now, for $10,000. Like you're not making it. You're in serious trouble. And the aid cap is
$10,000, you are, I mean, $10,000 won't even buy you enough food to survive for a year right now.
yes, you're screwed. Uh, uh, the only set of circumstances that I have seen it be relatively easy in to get assistance is kidney disease, honestly. Because otherwise they make you jump through enormous amount of hoops even if you qualify. So there is a welfare system in the United States, but we actively discourage its use. And there is some kind of absurd amount of money that we allocate for welfare that simply doesn't get used because people aren't able to jump through the hoops, or they aren't able to do all the paperwork, or they don't qualify. We have worked very hard to discourage the use of the social safety net here, and it's worked. There's not a lot. There's a lot of assistance that gets unused, but it's very hard to get access to it. And charity just doesn't.
You need to know how to navigate it, or else you'll never be able to.
It almost is in and of itself an effort that you would expend working, which was the point. There's also assistance, like non-governmental assistance is incredibly sparse. Like I think the American Kidney Foundation has an emergency grant that you can get one time for $100. $100 is not going to do anything. It's not like it would cost me more in effort, time, and energy to apply for the grant than I would get from the grant.
Absolutely. And like it's meant to force people to work, right? Like that's their goal, is to like anybody who isn't, anyone who isn't like working needs to still be like working, right?
Yes.
It's all about forcing people to do labor. And that's really what the abortion bans are also about. It's like forced labor. It's forced labor for women and men. Because guess what? These dudes who are getting people pregnant and normally would have relied on being the recipient of abortion care, like, childcare is going to come due for all these guys as well. So
I don't know. It seems to me like men are trying to make a very good effort at running from it. We'll see how that works out for them.
it's not going to work out, because in most states, a lot of the Dems within their limited agency are trying to actually press for greater child support rights. As a reaction, they realize they're so overwhelmed by this like Republican supermajority in their legislature. They know that they can't really do anything to overturn the abortion stuff. They just have to wait for the courts to rule it unconstitutional. So in the meantime, they're pressing for things like child support that begins during pregnancy, because obviously there's like hell of costs associated, even if you decide that you are going to not see a single doctor and just give birth by yourself at home, which lots of people do that still. Like it's still, there's costs, right? There's missed work, and there's cost to your body and cost to your mental health and your well-being, your dental health. I mean, all kinds of shit. Pregnancy sucks. So it's like but it's reproductive labor, and we don't really call it labor in this country. You know, you're just having a baby. People treat it like it's some sort of expensive hobby, like adopting a dog or something, right? Like it's like you're taking care of something, you're doing something worthwhile. Like we can see this proves that you're good and responsible and kind and caring, and we're so happy that you're doing it. But like nobody acknowledges the fact that my children are going to grow up someday and be tax-paying individuals who run society. Like without me doing the labor of growing a baby, birthing a baby, and raising these children, you know, there's no workers, there's no consumers. So if we were to go on a birth strike, which some people say we are on an unofficial birth strike here in the United States, it may not be coordinated, but when we look at sort of the statistics about who's giving birth and when they're giving birth, we really are kind of on a birth strike right now. People like my sister, who's like almost 10 years younger than me, she's like, no, no kids, no. They're striking because there's the working conditions for parenthood are so atrocious right now,
Right.
that as reproductive workers we have to strike.
It makes a certain amount of sense that it's systemic. Like the problem is the punishment of the system doesn't change the facts on the grounds or the material facts of why people aren't having kids. And I kind of get it. My sister decided to get another dog instead. So, I mean, I understand why these things aren't happening, like, because it feels like a gigantic risk that you're going to jump into alone.
Yeah, when no other society expects families to function as independently as we do here in the United States. In other, you know, developed societies, we see not only a larger system of familial support. You know, nowadays people are like, they live alone, they live away from their immediate family, they live away from their parents, they don't have their mother-in-law living in their spare bedroom, right? Like this is the kind of thing that allowed some flexibility and some enjoyment within parenthood, and now it's been sort of crushed and washed out. We no longer have retired grandparents, right? Everybody's working until the day they die. So we no longer have sort of this larger familial system. And for a long time, women like me, white women like me, relied on women of color to pick up the slack. If I wanted to have a career, I could just hire an immigrant woman to come clean my house for me and pay her some pittance because she doesn't have papers, right? This is how Gloria Steinem got all that shit done. She paid somebody else to do her work for her domestic labor, right? And now we've kind of come into a new phase of feminism where we no longer want to rely upon the oppression of someone else in order to get free, right? So like I could still do that. I could still hire someone for no money to come be my kid's nanny and clean my house and get my groceries or whatever. But I'm just like, no, I guess I'm going to have to do all of this because I'm not rich enough to pay someone a living wage. So it's like, I don't know.
Yes.
We call it, right? Intersections, race, gender, class. It's all sort of swirling around us as individuals. But hopefully it'll be better for the next generation. Unfortunately, we're right now in the pendulum swing backwards, right? Women got some freedoms. We made some movement. And now we're seeing the reaction. That's what we get to live through.
Well, there's a significant amount of pushback happening on a lot of fronts right now. Women's issues with abortion, trans issues, which I think are somewhat related, because
Totally 100% related.
a lot of the focus is very much on trans women and less so on trans men. Like a lot of the ire is focused on trans women, and there is the rest of the LGBTQ also is starting to see pushback, and that I don't necessarily want to say it's unexpected. It's alarming that there very much are active attempts at making it untenable for people to exist as they are.
Yeah, like, and literally we're just talking about the way people dress. Am I right? Like, what are we really talking about here? I mean,
well, it comes down to, and it comes down to, I think, a broad problem for all of those groups, that we over-sexualize them. Like, your existence is not necessarily sexual all the time. It's something you should be able to choose to do. And if you focus on trans people or LGBTQ people's, their sexuality alone overly sexualizes them, because like there are times when people aren't having sex and it's just not on their minds.
Most of the time people are not having sex. That is true.
Yes. So, I mean, it's a very strange focus in my mind, because for the average person, it shouldn't be that big a deal, but we push on it. I think there is, like, for us, how much the pendulum swings, it never goes back all the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
yeah, that's true. That's totally true. We'll never go back to the way it was before, like the transgender movement changed the way we all interact with our own genders, right? Like when a transgender individual lives in their authentic self, it creates space for me to live in my authentic self. You know, like you were saying, none of us are really, it's more than just our external presentation. It has to do with the way we interact with people. It has to do with the way we care for people. Like this idea that women are reproductive, women are generative, women are soft, gentle, kind, loving, intuitive, nurturing, right? This is the stereotype or the archetype of a woman. And a man is protective and strong and stoic and unbothered and resilient and you know what I mean, robust, right? These are all sort of the two ends of the spectrum. And it, as the mother of a small white boy, it breaks my heart to think that he's going to get boxed into this idea someday, because right now as a young person he's so sensitive. His tears flow freely when he feels sad. He is not afraid to express himself when he gets hurt emotionally or physically. He is understanding and compassionate, and I know that someday someone's going to look at him and tell him to man up and stop feeling that depth of emotion, or at least stop expressing that depth of emotion. And like, as his mom, that, like, I might cry just thinking about it. You know, like I just want him to be able to like look at his newborn baby someday and like have the same depth of emotion that his sister will have, right? Or is allowed to have or allowed to express. So I just feel like the second wave of feminism with Gloria Steinem and all of that was like about allowing women to act like men. You know, now I can wear pants and I can cut my hair short and I can be a girl boss CEO at Facebook and kick ass and take kickboxing classes and stuff, right? And be fierce and mean, resting bitch face. but we haven't yet had the revolution that says our boys can act like girls. Our boys can be kind and sensitive and soft and wear dresses and makeup if they want to. So that's what we're going through right now. And that's why all of everybody's grandpa is having a fucking heart attack about trans women, because they're like, oh no, boys can't wear makeup. It's just like, oh my gosh. Yep. And girls can't wear pants. Look how far we've come.
Yeah, there is, I think, kind of a subset of people my age and your age, of men who are kind of coming to the realization that they have to unfuck themselves.
Thank you. Yes.
Uh,
It's worth it. It's worth unfucking yourself, because
it,
once you're unfucked, people will fuck you and you don't have to be a weird incel.
and there is, I think, it is a lot of work, and it has been a process. Because you know me, I'm a little emotionally dead inside.
I've never found you to be emotionally dead. I found you to be a lot of things, Matt, but I don't know.
But you get, yeah, it's a lot of work to kind of push through that. And like,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the takeaway from any of these movements, is that if you make things better for one group, it does not necessarily mean that it's not going to get better for you. There is a kind of, we're all pulling on the same oars together. Hey, Imran, thanks for showing up. We can replay it later. We're all pulling on the same oars together, and like feminism and changing those gender definitions and exploring these things from the perspective of transgenderism is going to make the situation better for cis people, not worse.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if like cisgender people were able to just like express their full selves instead of having to like be worried about being labeled like a sissy or being labeled like a tomboy, or like I just think that it frees all of us so much to just be able to think about what we like and what we don't like I will not, I don't wear a stitch of makeup. I can't, I can't. It's not part of me. Like I don't care to, but like for years and years and years and years and years, I did, because that's what girls do, right? But that is
Yeah.
like so fucking stupid. And at the end of the day, you know why they want all girls to wear makeup? So they can sell makeup to all girls. I mean, I stopped shaving my armpits like 10 years ago. And like, I just, like, what? They just want to sell more razors. My body grows hair. Why can't I just be a human? So, like, I think that a lot of it is tied up in capitalism, this idea that, like, if they create a box that no one can really fit in, it creates an insecurity that they can sell to, like the freer we are, the less reliant upon products we are to create our sense of self or create like our sense of centeredness. But when we come back to the trans stuff, like it's more than just appearance, right? So this clinic that I worked at, I know we're coming up on an hour and a half here. I'm not going to rant on forever, I swear. But like the clinic that I worked at in Montana, where we did the abortions, we also did transgender healthcare. And we were one of the first clinics in the country doing transgender healthcare for kids. And most of these children had extremely supportive parents. So when I see legislation coming across that says these kids are going to be taken from their parents, and as someone who interacts with like the child welfare system in a number of different ways, right? Like as a kinship foster parent, as someone who helps parents sort of like adjust to parenting, as someone who provides emergency and crisis resources for parents, right? Someone who has seen many sides of the child welfare system, like to think of removing a child from a home for bringing a kid to the doctor for transgender healthcare, for gender affirming healthcare. Like, I'm going to be careful about how I phrase all this for YouTube.
Thank you.
I'm just saying that I dare someone to try to take my kids from me, right? And I know there are other parents who feel that way as well. And the idea that the government can make a choice like this, like the fact that the government can just come into someone's home and take their child from them is a fact, right? This is a fact. And this happens to certain people more than others. Neglect and poverty tend to have similar symptoms, right? And people who are not of a higher socioeconomic class can't afford lawyers to fight CPS cases. They just have to be subjected to the system that oftentimes criminalizes them for literally not being able to pay the bills or not being able to afford childcare, which, by the way, childcare in the United States is about $500 a week. So if you're not making a lot of money at your job, like that's why I quit working, was because I couldn't make enough to pay for childcare. So anyway, now we're going to be seeing children removed from homes because their parent has sought gender affirming healthcare or because they have sought gender affirming healthcare for their child. And
Well, there's a very real danger in that too, because there are cases where kids do need to be removed from homes, like in cases of actual abuse. And if you overload the system with non-abusive cases, this already underfunded system is going to have more cracks.
Yeah, it's overloaded. Yeah, exactly. The system's already overloaded and things go through the cracks, right? I mean, they don't necessarily remove a child because someone's been using drugs during pregnancy, but they will arrest a pregnant person and let them give birth in jail. So
Which
like
is
when they talk
diabolical.
about protecting, yeah, I mean, hey, people have been arrested for trying to have a vaginal birth after a cesarean too. Doctors call the police and the police show up and they handcuff you and they bring you to the operating room and they handcuff you to the bed while they give you a major abdominal surgery and deliver your baby. And then all of your children are taken because they call you an endangerment. You've endangered your child simply for wanting to give birth with your vagina instead of through surgery. So at the end of the day, reproductive justice, we're finally to the thesis. Reproductive justice is about three things: the right not to parent or the right not to have children. So this includes contraception, abortion. This includes the right to have sex with people who aren't going to get you pregnant or have sex for pleasure, right? Because that's really a lot of this is some people don't believe sex should be for pleasure. It should only be for procreation. The second facet of reproductive justice is the right to have children. So I know a lot of people our age wish they could have kids but can't afford it, or wish they could have kids but they can't qualify to adopt or something like this, right? So the second facet is the right not to have kids, the right to have children. And then the third facet of reproductive justice is the right to parent your children in safe and healthy environments. And so this is where we talk about things like gun violence, school choices, like underfunded public schools is a reproductive justice issue, because we right to send our kids to a safe school. They're going to get a good education and not get brutalized by a teacher or adult. It includes safe neighborhoods, includes clean drinking water, and this, right? Like this comes into reproductive justice. And so, right, when we look at the facets of this goal, short here in the United States, there is no reproductive justice. So what I do on like a small level, I help people individually navigate all bullshit. But with ICANN, International Clearing Awareness Network, we also have over 200 chapters run by volunteers where we're global. We're in 12 different countries trying to change sort of birth culture and make it a little bit better for people. That includes the right to abortion, because when we value the life of an unborn baby or a fetus or an embryo over the decision-making power of a fully fledged American citizen woman, we are impeding upon sort of the basic human rights, right? We can't value the life of a baby over a life of an unborn baby over the life of a mother, and you are not required to undergo surgery to save anyone's life, not even your own child's life. So when we talk about this idea that you're required to put yourself through a pregnancy, when you're required to put yourself through a childbirth experience in order to give someone else life, you know, that's just sort of a logical fallacy in so many ways. It's I don't know, maybe logical fallacy is not the right argumentative fallacy, but you know, you're not, Matt, nobody can force me to give you a kidney, right?
Right. No, you have more, and you can't even be forced to do so after death. So we give women, reproductive individuals, less autonomy than corpses.
Right. But for the record, you can have my kidney.
It's a process. We're working on it.
It's a process, he said.
No, it really is. It is a involved process. We should probably get to wrapping up. So before you go, and anyone who wants to ask a question, now's the time. Before you go,
I like the audience, so hopefully I didn't put my foot in my mouth too much.
no, don't worry, we're good. Before you go, what steps can people start to take to try to help alleviate these problems?
That's a great question. You know, if there's one takeaway, it's just like be like Matt and like show up for reproductive people when they have pregnancies, and just like be there to be willing to listen and be willing to just sort of like, I know this phrase is kind of wishy-washy, but like holding space for people, and just like know that pregnancy is kind of a fucked up thing to go through, even when everything goes really, really well. So pregnant people in your life will be like, oh yeah, we're so happy, everything's great, I'm really healthy, you know, but don't be afraid to sort of ask some follow-up questions and dig a little deeper and just like listen, you know, because honestly, like, it's great to call your legislator and it's wonderful to get out the vote. You know, here in Illinois, we have election here on April 4th, and Illinois, just because it's a blue state doesn't mean we won't change, right? So in blue states, we have to make sure we're showing up for our pro-choice legislators and stuff. But honestly, they're so fucking useless. Like, aid access is the place to order abortion pills. Tell your friends. Share the stuff on Instagram that you see about how to access abortion pills. I've given up hope that we can really impact the system as a whole, and we just sort of need to create more underground networks. And people have done this. The right wing has been doing this. They have their weird little essential oil MLMs. We can have our abortion pill MLMs, okay? So just, you know, think outside the box. And like, yeah, if you want to call your legislator and tell them to fuck off, that's cool, but they're not gonna listen to us. They don't care.
Okay,
Is
question.
that depressing?
No, we're good. We did 2 episodes, and we have a 3rd episode coming on various genocides. This has been positively warm and fuzzy.
I mean, it is a form of genocide. The maternal health care system. This is the book, Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts. This will explain exactly how the maternal health care system has been used as a form of genocide for Black and Indigenous people in the United States.
Your copy's nicer than mine. I think it's up there. Yeah, it is. Anyway, question. Yes. Hang on, it moved. I don't like what my chat does. The chat box does sometimes. Can you ask how labor energy intensive working in pregnancy, I don't think that's the word you wanted to use, Cal, pregnancy centers is, not crisis centers, but
oh yeah, sure.
Like
yeah,
a
like
clinic.
Like at an abortion clinic. Yeah.
Yes.
So I also work to unionize abortion clinic workers. Unfortunately, yeah, there it is. Right on. It's an enlightening read, to say the least. Yeah, working in an abortion clinic is kind of a beast in and of itself. So like the the thing about a lot of professions, not just abortion clinic work, we see this in nursing, we see this in teaching, we see this in a lot of professions of passion, where they're just sort of like, oh, you're doing a great thing when you show up to work every day. You should be willing to sort of accept a vow of poverty in order to show up and do this good work every day. So right now we're seeing swaths of abortion clinic workers and reproductive justice workers unionizing. And this has been a really important part of my work over the last 10 years. Like I said, I have a background in union organizing, and my dad's in a union. Like I just kind of grew up around unions. So when I was working in the abortion clinic, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, we need a union. Anyway, I ended up rage quitting that job because nobody was interested in unionizing with me. But I kept talking about it, and I have a column with an organization called Repro Jobs, and they are sort of like pushing for industry-wide change. It's almost like a digital worker center for abortion care workers. And now there's something like nearly 20 unions in the industry, and they're pushing for not only better working conditions at work, but they're also pushing the unions to sort of show up for abortion care workers in different ways and show up for abortion rights. So now the AFL-CIO has a coalition that is working on just reproductive justice issues. And this past summer, I was at the Labor Notes conference, and I was on a panel with a couple of other people who are doing this work, and we were sort of talking about how labor can start showing up more for abortion, because obviously this is a working class person's issue. Wealthy people can always hop on a plane and fly to, France or Scandinavia and have their abortion overseas. It's working class women who need an abortion clinic in their neighborhood. So the unions should care, but unfortunately the unions are still pretty male dominated. So they're a little behind the times.
Yeah, there is, at least my experience working in a union, the union was much more concerned about preserving the concept of labor and doing labor than it was about securing labor rights. So, at least that was my particular takeaway. I'm not bitter, not at all. Anyway, unless you got anything else, I think because Avery's about to eat my foot. Much like Argus used to do. Anyway. Anyway.
Yeah, if anyone wants to continue the conversation, they're welcome to like find me on Instagram or whatever. I literally could talk for days about this. I hope I sort of circled around at the kind of thing that you were hoping to get at, but
Absolutely.
It is such a big topic. It's hard to rein me in at times, I know. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation, I'm totally up for it on Instagram, or if you want to email me or reach out on my website. And it's good to connect over a video chat and see your face.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you again, at least in person-ish. Thank you for showing up today, Emily. I know this was a busy time, and I know we scheduled it before, and everything got messed up, and then you didn't follow up, and then I didn't follow up, and
there were so many babies, and I was just like in a fog for a while. And so anyway, now I'm like on the other side of baby season and a human again. But yeah, I appreciate you tackling this issue, and I hope I hope you get some rest.
eventually, the coffee probably won't help that. Anyway. All right, and I want to thank everybody else for coming out tonight, or this morning, rather. See, that's how messed up I am this morning, and I hope you all have a good day, and I will probably see most of you later on tonight when President Sunday debates Haas, and that'll probably be a train wreck. So have a good one.